Alrighty then, I think we've waited enough time for the others to join. Hopefully they'll trickle in as we start. My name is Nelson. I'm the marketing manager at TOA Canada. And today's webinar will be presented by our Western Regional Sales Manager, Mr. Warren Strem. We will be covering a couple of new products that have come out, I would say, in the last, 2 to 4 months. One of them is the MW-41BT, which is an audio interface with Bluetooth and USB. And then just recently, we've released the 8-channel DA-150EH. Warren will take you through some of the features and benefits and application. So Warren, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Nelson, and thanks to those who have joined us today. Should be a bit of a shorter one today as we go through these. Be able to go through fairly quickly, so not going to take up huge amounts of time, but a couple of very excellent new products that we've brought to the line to really expand our capabilities in a couple of different ways. First of all, we'll start out with the MW-41BT. Now, this is a new audio interface that we have developed with both Bluetooth and USB on board. As you can see, also mic input and a 3.5mm auxiliary input on here as well. We'll go through this in just a little bit more depth. So as I was mentioning, we do have microphone inputs. We also have the line level input on the 3.5mm connection over here, and USB as well. Now, each of these does have its own, or does have volume controls based on what your input settings are. The mic has its own independent volume control because it is always live. So your mic is always going to have override power over the other inputs. So whether it's if you've got something coming in on the line level 3.5, or on the USB or on Bluetooth, as soon as a mic input, as soon as something comes in on the mic, it's going to mute out the other inputs so that what is being said on the microphone can be heard. Now, of course, this also does provide phantom power for the microphone. As you can see here as well, there is an input button. That is how we select which input outside of the microphone. So whether we're selecting the USB or the Bluetooth or the line, that's your input selection button. Volume controls on there as well, on-off button, as you can see very easily. And then for the USB, we have the play and pause, of course, and back and forward controls, so you can scroll through the files, the audio files that are on your USB stick. As I mentioned, of course, volume controls for whichever inputs happen to be live. Yeah, we kind of hit on all of these. So then we also have the balance line output that connects on the back. We'll get into the connection here shortly, and this installs in a typical 2-gang electrical box. So without too much further ado, we'll hop into some of the power connections, etc. So the actual main connection on the back of the unit is going to be a Cat 5 or Cat 6 connection. It's actually not taking a digital signal. It's just using that RJ45 connection to provide enough contacts and enough carriers, enough copper, to run the signal and power through the same cable. But there's not actually a digital connection there. It's going to break out as you get to the mixer, and so that you can have your power and signal hitting to the rack, rather than having to separate them out at the install location. So fairly straightforward when it comes to that. You know, we're connecting into the Cat 5, into the RJ45 connection here, and we're carrying both DC power and audio output through that same cable. Now, this is how it breaks out, as I mentioned. So we're carrying that Cat 5 cable into a breakout unit, and that's going to break out so that we can have our AC power source connected to it just on a terminal connection, and as well our signal is going to come out on a terminal connection as well to plug into basically any amplifier system or any mixer system. So we're not proprietary. Like I say, it's not a digital signal like that's married to a specific mixing system or DSP system. So it makes it very simple to use with any audio system. As you can see on the back, not a whole lot to mess around with back there. There's actually a pin out on the connection as well to give you that information if you don't happen to have the manual handy. Bluetooth connection offers users to play from items such as their phone, a music player, or any other device with a Bluetooth output on it. So pairing is really quite simple, pretty straightforward by comparison to anything else you've ever paired on Bluetooth. So you power it up, use the input selection for Bluetooth, open the Bluetooth settings on your source device, select the MW-41BT, enter the pairing code, and boom, you're done. You're connected. So the only thing to really worry about too much after that is connecting to the next unit that comes along. So you do need to be disconnected from the prior unit. If it's still in range, it has to be disconnected before you can add another Bluetooth device to it. So that is one thing to be aware of. During installation, so this is very, very simple as well. Typical 2-gang e-box for flush mount installation, and we just connect the Cat5 through there and attach the panel to it, and Bob's your uncle, you're done when it comes to the installation of the basic unit itself without the lock boxes, etc. But if you are using a lockbox, it's a fairly similar idea when it comes to one of the lockbox options, this being the flush mount lockbox. So, you start with that basic installation into the 2-gang box, but you do want to have the gasket in between for weatherproofing, etc., in case that's needed. Once that's in place, it kind of goes together fairly simply like that. You've got the second gasket for the inside of the box, and then the MW goes in, and you can lock her up, and you don't have to worry about having, if it's say it's a high school gym, you don't have to worry about all those little fingers getting in there and messing around with things when it's not authorized to be accessed. So very handy components that we have in the flush mount lockbox and the surface mount lockbox, depending on how you need to have that done. And these are obviously a look at those two units, those accessories. So they do form a very nice little lockbox, black in color, and hopefully kind of unobtrusive when it comes to the actual installation itself. A very, very versatile system. So this can be used with just about any audio system. There's very few places that we aren't quoting the MW-41BT right now. And it does kind of give you a few benefits when it comes to, a single location to control your sound system. So if it's very basic in operation, you can have those local volume controls being, your main control for that input. So if that's all that's on your audio system, you've got all your control right there. The ability to input more than one device is very handy as well, because of course that kind of gives you a centralized point where you can put those different devices together and be able to select between them. That mic input gives you something a little bit over and above what you might have on your mixing system, because this is kind of summing everything together. It's not acting as a separate output, so your mic is not taking up a separate output from, rather a separate input on your mixing system from what the line level or USB or Bluetooth are taking up. So it's building all of those into a single input into your system. Very, very straightforward in operation. Really no magic about how it operates. We're all very familiar with how those basic controls function on a typical USB player or on Bluetooth or any of those other protocols. So very, very simple to operate, and quite a nice aesthetically pleasing design. So it's it's not going to be obtrusive in the space and look like it doesn't belong there necessarily. So we kind of put together a couple of line risers to go with this, just to kind of show you how it would go together. So your MW-41BT plus power supply would be wired into the amplifier. Of course, that power supply would be local to the rack and not to the wall-mounted unit, so you don't have to have that wall wart at the installation location. That's going to be living in the rack and connected through that breakout cable to the MW-41, giving it the power it needs, and then it's just a line level signal going into the mixer amplifier system. Now in this case, we also have a wireless mic and a AM/FM tuner showing here, and we've got the speakers. So really a nice complete design for a small application that we would typically see. Now this one here is a little bit of a larger application, perhaps. This one has the same kind of thing going on when it comes to the MW-41BT. Actually, I'm not sure why this Ethernet connection is here. You don't actually have an Ethernet connection to the MW-41, so that is actually in error. So you don't have any network connections going to that. You would just have this one connection going using that Cat5 cable back to the rack, where you would have your power breakout and into the line inputs on the mixing system. Now, in this case, like I say, we have the wireless mic tuner built right into the back of the mixing system, so we don't have to have an external tuner. And what's not shown here is we would also have transformers between the SRS4s, because those are generally a low impedance speaker, so we would have to have a 70-volt transformer for this particular setup to work using the A848D. But the line riser in and of itself stands, and when it comes to those connections, the only one here is that network connection that shouldn't actually be there. But otherwise, if you are using the 840A, one thing to be aware of is that it can be networked and controlled remotely, so that's where that connection actually belongs. Something for a little bit larger facility, perhaps a gym, sports facility, things like that. In this case, we have that erroneous Ethernet connection that shouldn't be there. But everything else really is basically the same. So we've got our wireless mic connecting in here through one of the inputs on the M864D. Similarly, the MW41 is connected to another one. In this case, we also have a paging override for the system coming from the, say it's a remote PA system. So say this was a school gym, you would have an external PA system that's feeding this and giving a contact closer to change the presets on the M864 and allow those pages to come through this audio system. So again, a nice kind of complete riser that you might see in terms of an example of these slightly larger facilities. So really, there's not a whole lot else to talk about when it comes to the MW-41BT. I can stop right now for 30 seconds or so. If anybody's got any questions, you can certainly hop in now. Okay, it's pretty straightforward, so probably not a lot of questions on the MW. So we'll move on to the DA-150EH multi-channel power amplifier. So the goal here was we wanted to do more zones with a little bit less power per zone with a single rack space footprint, so reducing the footprint for higher channel count. So what we've done here is we've got 8 channels at 150 watts per channel at 70 volt. So great for these higher channel count distributed audio systems where you're doing up to 8 zones, or well, even more if you're adding on more amplifiers. You can add more channels, etc. Depending on what your DSP is or your mixing system is, to allow those channels to operate. Each channel is a 1-to-1, so there's no ganging of channels, so it's 1 in, 1 out. So if you're coming in input 1, you're going to be going out output 1. Separate volume controls for each, so you can set your limits on those channels. Low power consumption, lightweight, balanced inputs, built-in circuitry protection, and of course 70 volt or 100 volt impedance. As I mentioned, this is not a low impedance amplifier, so this is working only on those higher impedances. On the front panel, we have fairly typical, straightforward setup for an amplifier that does not have any user controls on the front. That's kind of the key to note here, is that your end user is not going to be just coming to the rack and messing around with the volume settings on the front of the amplifier, since those are all tucked to the back. There's not even a power switch on the front that they can mess around with. So we've kind of taken away all of those control functions from the front panel and slid them around to the back so that we don't have again, those little fingers that don't belong in the rack, the ones that have a tendency to mess around with installations. We don't have those guys getting in there and messing around with your amplifier settings. So what is on the front, though? Power indicator, obviously, makes sense. Peak indicators, so we're going to give you a notification if any of your channels are peaking. Of course, we have signal indicators and protect indicators as well. So if it goes into protect, you'll know about it. Furthermore, on the back, fairly straightforward stuff here as well. We have the power switch off to the right, power connection, fuse all over there on the right hand side. Then we've got all of our inputs here, all, like I say, kind of indicated as a 1-to-1, and their volume controls beside. And as well, we of course have our speaker output settings. So for each channel, whether it's running at 70 volt or 100 volt, that setting is done right there. And of course, all your connections off to the left for the speakers. Another example of a line riser for this system. Now we could just as easily have put MW-41BT instead of the DT-940. Basically the same operation, but in this case we've got 8 channels being fed to the amplifier from the M8080 DSP, which is our new matrix that we launched about a few months ago. So that is selling now, in stock now. And we can build systems like this without a lot of wait time as it stands right now. We just got our first shipment of the DA-150EH in, so those are available in stock at the moment. But once that first order sells out, that first group sells out, it'll be a little while likely before we see them show up again. So get your orders in if you are looking to do systems like these. And in this example, aside from the connections between the amplifier, which is pretty straightforward, 8 ins or 8 outputs coming from the DSP going to the 8 inputs on the amplifier, and those then feeding 8 different zones of speakers, or 8 different sets of speakers, depending on how they're done. In fact, these F32 862s, you would be controlling those, you would be feeding them likely the same signal as you're feeding some of these other channels, depending on what your output structure looks like. And for input side on this one, we do have the paging source. We have 2 different paging sources coming in here, one being the RM800R, the M800RM microphone, which is a paging microphone you can, which is proprietary to the M8080 to page up to the 8 zones from that microphone, easily done. There's also touch panel control for the M8080D, which is going to control your routing, volume control, etc. And in this case, we also have a paging source in the form of a SIP connection to a telephone system coming into the 8080 as well. Now, one thing to bear in mind with that system is that with the M8080, you can only take 1, maybe 2 zones of SIP paging for this, because there's only 2 contact closures on the 8080. So your primary usage for a SIP connection to the 8080 would be as an all-call page. Wouldn't necessarily be able to page each and every individual zone using SIP, using the 8080. But this example, you would be able to use multi-zone paging from SIP. In this case, it would have to be up to 5 zones plus all call using the M9000M2, which builds the SIP module directly into the back of the amplifier. Otherwise, very, very similar to the previous riser when it comes to the functionality of it. We would have 8 outputs coming to, which are not shown here. We don't have the modules populated in this image of the M9000M2 that would give you 8 channels, but if you can envision that they were there, you would have 8 channels coming out from the M9000M2 going into the 8 inputs on the DA-150EH, and otherwise operating exactly the same. Now, on the right-hand side, you will see volumes and source selection panels. Those are actually connected back directly to the M9000M2 and specifically the RC001T module that would have to be there for those. So those would not be connected on the same line as the speakers. Those would actually be connected through Cat5 back to the M9000M2. But otherwise, what you see here is pretty straightforward. We've got the direct connections from the amplifier to the speaker zones that it is powering. So, like I said, this one's a bit of a shorter one. There's not a ton of details to go through necessarily on each and every function of the MW-41 and the DA-150EH. So at this time, I will open it up to some questions, and we'll go from there. Have we any questions at this point?
Doug, if that was you raising your hand, you go right ahead.
I've just allowed your mic there.
Looks like he's still on mute, though.
Yeah, he is.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go.
Ah, there we go. The MW-41B, is it possible to PoE power it?
No, it does not take a network connection.
Okay, and you're showing on there with that device, you're using the Cat5 cable for power, does the unit come with an adapter for the other end to break it out?
Yes, so that would be on this slide here, just in case you missed it.
The 246.
Boom. Right. Where'd it go? Here. Oh, there. That one. Okay, so as you can see here, we have the Cat5 connection coming back from the unit to a breakout right here, and that allows us to connect the AC through terminal connection as well as a connection for your mixer.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. I'm just going through and allowing everybody's mics to be available in case you do have anybody else have any questions.
Warren, on chat, Lewis is asking, what's the Bluetooth distance for the MW?
I believe we're talking in the 30 to 50 foot range. I don't think it's ridiculously long, but I think it depends on whether you've got line of sight, whether you've got impedances in the way, things like walls, etc. So I wouldn't be at all concerned about, say, a school gym, something like that, that's maybe 80 or 80 feet max or so. I don't know that it would be much longer than that. I honestly don't know the overall distance. I'm not even sure we've 100% tested the exact dropout of when most devices would, and I think it's going to depend on the device as well.
So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.